And we're just going to read the first 4 verses actually today. Hebrews, beginning at verse 1, chapter 1. God, who at various times and in various ways spoke in time past to the fathers by the prophets, has in these last days spoken to us by his Son, whom he has appointed heir of all things, through whom also he made the worlds, who being the brightness of his glory and the express image of his person, and upholding all things by the word of his power, when he had by himself purged our sins, sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high, having become so much better than the angels, as he had by inheritance obtained a more excellent name than they. Now that is one of the most packed 4 verses in the entire Bible. And it's going to take at least 3 hours. No, I'm kidding. It will take us all the remaining time of our lives to explore that. But we will do today as the Spirit leads. Now, the opening verses of the Epistle to the Hebrews are among the most magnificent passages in all the Bible, dealing with the doctrine of incarnation, or the first advent. The coming of God to this earth in human flesh and form are the cornerstone of redemptive or salvation history. From that event flow the blessings of God through Christ in all of our lives, in all of their ways. Now, ordinarily, most Christians are accustomed to coming into a church like this during the Advent season, and they're expecting to hear the preacher expound perhaps some text from the prophets, Isaiah or Micah, or from the Gospels, Matthew and Luke. But it may come as a surprise to us that the Epistle to the Hebrews is a rich treasury of the spiritual accomplishments achieved by Jesus Christ in his incarnation, in his coming to earth. If it were possible this morning to sum up the theme of this epistle in one word, it would be the word superior. The words better, perfect, and heavenly appear frequently throughout this epistle, and they develop and they prove the theme that Christ is superior in both his person and his priesthood to Judaism and all that it has to offer. Now, by virtue of this coming to earth, the first time, Jesus returned to the Father in heaven with a superior name, with a superior office, with a superior rest, with a superior eternal salvation, with a superior covenant, with a superior body, with a superior joy, with a superior company, and with a superior way of doing God's will. Let's explore the details. Now, without greeting, without salutation or introduction, you'll notice that this epistle jumps right in. It gets to the point quickly. The subject of the very first verse is that God spoke. For your information, 68 times the word God is used throughout this epistle. That's an average of once every 73 words over the 13 chapters. Few New Testament books mention God so often. In fact, we just finished a series on the book of Esther where the name of God was never actually mentioned anywhere in the book. The very first activity of God is that he has spoken. And that's something we do every day. We speak to each other, we speak to people on the phone, and hopefully we communicate effectively. Well, God is not interested in speaking just for the sake of speaking. He's interested in speaking to be heard. And the very first activity when God spoke is to keep in mind that he has spoken in different ways, at different times, in or through the prophets. Now, the prophets, you recall, are the divinely inspired spokesmen and women for God of the Old Testament. They were esteemed servants of God whose spiritual ministry is preserved in the Old Testament, it was not always received with the due respect that it deserved, but the prophets were there. They spoke, and they were heard, or they were not heard. But God used various methods and means to communicate in and through the prophets. You'll remember Moses. God used a burning bush. You'll remember Elijah. God used a still small voice to speak to him. To Isaiah, God used a spectacular vision in the temple, where God's train, his Shekinah glory, filled the temple. To Hosea, God spoke to him in his family circumstances, his unusual marriage. And then to Moses, God spoke in the form of a basket of summer fruit. God also conveyed his message to them through visions and dreams, through angels, through the Urim and Thummim, through symbols and natural events, through states of ecstasy, through a pillar of fire by night and a pillar of cloud by day. And we could go on with the forms that God used to speak to and through his prophets. God could and did appear in Ur of the Chaldees to Abraham. He appeared in Haran. He appeared in Canaan. He appeared in Egypt to Moses. He appeared in Babylon to Daniel. He appeared to Ezekiel in a wheel. And he appeared to Ezekiel in the death of his wife, whom he was not permitted to mourn over. So when it comes to God's revelations, there is no lack of variety, because divine revelation is not a monotonous activity that always took place in the same way at the same time to the same people. God used variety. When God wanted to get the attention of his spokesman, he could make a donkey speak the same language as the owner of that donkey, and he could even cause that donkey to rebuke the owner in his own language. Get ready for some surprises this week in your life. Yet in spite of these multifaceted revelations in and through the prophets, their ministry was always partial. It was always fragmentary. To each prophet was committed a measure of a revelation, a specific message for a specific time, for a specific situation, but in every case, it was incomplete. There was something missing. Amos cried out for social justice in his day, but he never saw it. Isaiah grasped something of the holiness of God in that vision in the temple, but he said, "Woe is me. I am undone. I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips, for mine eyes have seen the King in his glory." Hosea, from his own bitter experience in marriage, realized the wonder of God's unmatched forgiving love. Now, each prophet had his own personal experience, just like you have had your own experience of God. But in all of these revelations, truth was doled out in installments. Whether it was presented as law, history, poetry, prophecy, warning, or judgment, and whether it was presented orally or it was written down in black and white, it was fragmentary and had to be presented in such a way that it could be understood by the people, given their human limitations at that particular time. But now all of these various periodic and partial revelations are eclipsed by a revelation from God that is both preeminent and final. In other words, here is something, or better yet, someone who trumps all the previous revelations combined, and yet stands in perfect continuity and consistency with them. This revelation bears the awesome distinction and quality and unique identity of God's very own Son. Unlike anything else or any other way God has ever spoken to anyone at any time in any situation. And the author of this epistle wants us to know, as his readers, that we must understand that there is both a discontinuity and a continuity. The discontinuity is with the past. The Son is not just one more in a long line of prophets or prophetic voices sent by God. Instead, he is superior to any and all revelations heretofore, and inaugurates with his coming a new age, the Messianic age. At the same time, there is continuity with the past. The Son, as a revelation, is the full and final fulfillment of all other Old Testament revelations. Now, John declared this. He said, "No one has seen God at any time." The only begotten Son, there's that word, who is in the bosom of the Father, he has declared him. And at his baptism in the Jordan River by John the Baptist, a voice was heard from heaven, and that voice said, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." Jesus himself took Philip to task. He said, "Philip, have I been with you so long, and yet you have not known me? He who has seen me has seen the Father. So how can you say, 'Show us the Father and we'll be satisfied'? He that has seen me has seen the Father." We ask, how should this truth impact my life today? After all, don't we live in the most out-of-gear society? I mean, did you ever see such restlessness? Did you ever see so many people unsettled? Did you ever see so many people whose bodies are torn and disfigured? What is there that can be counted on to give some form of stability, some form of order, some form of meaning to our daily routine when everything around us seems to be in a progressive state of decline and even imminent collapse? I mean, must we make these periodic trips to Disneyland just to come back to some semblance of order? Or do we have to withdraw into the unfathomable silent depths of our own isolation, our own misgivings, our own unfulfilled expectations, our own depression? Where do you stop? Clearly, the author of the epistle tells us that the solution is not found by looking within, but by looking at the Son, Jesus Christ. And speaking to the Corinthian Christians, Paul wrote, "For now," in other words, in this time of imperfection, this side of glory, we are looking as if in a mirror dimly. A blurred reflection is there, a riddle, an enigma. But when the time of perfection comes, we will see reality face to face. We will see things as they really are. Now I know in part, just in fragments, like was given to those prophets. But then, in that state of perfection, I will know fully, just as I have been fully known by God. Now, ancient mirrors were made of polished brass, you say. They were not that fancy glass that you looked in this morning. The contrast is between the inadequate knowledge of an object gained by seeing it reflected in a dim mirror compared with the perfect reflection, the perfect idea of seeing something directly. Now, in this present life, anyone enlightened by the Holy Spirit of God can see God only, but always, in His Son. You say, well, what do we see? Well, if we're honest, and we're diligent, and we're sincere, and we spend some time in the Word of God, and we spend some time honestly in worship, and we take time to pray, there are a few things we see. We see the perfections and the glory of His nature. We see the riches of His grace and goodness displayed in Christ. We see the glory of Christ as full of grace and truth. We're filled with love for Him, though we do not see Him physically. The desires of our souls turn from the world, the flesh, and the devil to the eternal realities, to God, to His kingdom, which is an everlasting kingdom, to the glories and the joy and the unsullied and unspoiled and unstained beauty of heaven. And we are being changed as we look at these things into the same image by the power of the Holy Spirit. We discern the things of the Spirit of God because the veil is being systematically removed. The more time we spend with God, the more time we spend in worship, the more the things of the earth fall down, the veil comes down, and we see into the reality of wondrous things ahead. David said, "Open my eyes, that I may behold wondrous things out of thy law." Now that means that thanks to Christ's coming the first time into this world and calling us, as He did in His very first sermon, repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand, then we can begin to experience something of the magnitude and the grace of God amid all the questions, amid all the frustrations and the disappointments of this life. And we can claim Jesus' promise. He said, "I have many things to say to you, but you can't bear them now. However, when He, the Spirit of truth, has come, He will guide you into all truth, for He will not speak of His own authority, but whatever He hears, He will speak, and He will tell you of things to come. He will glorify me, for He will take what is mine, and He will declare it unto you." You won't live in the dark. You won't live in the shadows. You won't live stumbling over your own feet. There'll be a sense of clarity. There'll be a sense of conviction about your life. You won't have to constantly be looking over your shoulder and asking, "Am I doing right?" You won't need that. And just as the Spirit of God spoke through James and John and Luke and Peter and Paul and all the other New Testament writers, and they consequently expounded for us the full-orbed revelation of God in His Son, so we can rely on the Holy Spirit to aid us in understanding and owning our own role, even in these confused and confusing times. We can be set apart, as it were. Even some Christmas songs merit our judicious Christian censorship. because they are giving us a mixed message. I don't know where I was this week, but I heard this one. Someday soon we all will be together if the fates allow. Until then, we'll have to muddle through somehow. So have yourself a merry little Christmas now. I don't know about you, but I don't particularly like that song. I do not like the idea of muddling through anything somehow. When it comes particularly to the matter of my salvation and my eternal security and where I will be spending eternity, I want clarity. I want truth. I want to know without the shadow of a doubt where I'll be when this body collapses and is laid in a grave. And I want to know that through the rest of my journey here on this earth, I'm not a mistake. There's a purpose for me being here, and I want to fulfill it. Now, when I am ill, here's what happens. I don't walk out on the street and ask a person, what do you think is wrong with me? No, I look for a doctor that has the proper credentials to help provide me with a sense of certainty and direction as to my care. And so it is spiritually. When sin has affected my life, when it has crippled me, when it has torn me inside out, the problem of separation from God and others is something that I need a specialist for. And so I consult a specialist. And the specialist is exactly who is mentioned in this passage. Verses 2 through 4, the one who alone has received a more excellent name is the Son, and all of the attendant qualifications and credentials are given in those 2 verses. What are they? Listen to the top 7 credentials. 1, he's appointed heir of all things. Now, inheritance is something you may give to your children, but in Bible days, inheritance was naturally connected with the Son and with sonship. That's who would get the inheritance. And Jesus is appointed heir of everything. He gets everything in the end. Everything. Because he deserves everything. I'll show you how. Qualification number 2. Through him, through the Son, God made the universe. That's the fundamental qualification of the revealer of God. He stands above and behind creation. He was there. Make no question about it. Everything that came into being, whether it's in the highest heavens above the Hubble telescope and where it can reach, to the lowest depths of the ocean, he's there. He knew exactly what was going on because he was designing it. Thirdly, the Son is the radiance of God's glory. He is the effulgence. He is the flood of resplendent light as the Shekinah glory filled Solomon's temple at the dedication service. Fourth, he is the exact representation of God's being. Jesus is not a mere reflection. We don't say Jesus is like God. No. He is the exact representation or stamp. So that if you went to your desk at home and you pulled out a stamp, and this is my stamp, you said, and you put it on the paper, I would expect that what you just put on the paper is the exact representation of the stamp that you're holding in your hand. And Jesus is the exact representation of God. And fifthly, he sustains all things by his powerful word. You got up this morning only because of one thing. Your heart was sustained through the night, or you wouldn't be here. And he upholds the created universe, every detail of it, so that it carries forward God's purpose. And sixthly, he has provided purification for sins. Now this is where it gets very interesting. Chapters 7 through 10 of Hebrews expands on this, so it must be very important to take up that many chapters out of a small epistle. And in that section, we have this statement: for such a high priest is fitting for us, one who meets our needs, one who is holy, harmless, undefiled, separate from sinners, made higher than the angels, higher than the heavens, who does not daily, as those high priests, need to offer up sacrifices first for his own sins and then for the sins of the people. For this he did once, when he offered up what? Himself. For the law appoints as high priests men who have weakness. But the word of the oath, which came after the law, appoints the Son, there's that word again, who has been perfected forever. And credential number 7 is just as important. It says, after he had provided purification for sins. See, that's what he came to do. After he had provided this purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty in heaven. Now, if that doesn't make any sense to you, if it doesn't quite grip you, consider Hebrews 10:11, which says, and every high priest stands daily at his service, offering repeatedly the same sacrifices which can never take away sins. Listen, he does stand. He doesn't sit. He stands. And in the simple scriptural deduction, that means the work is never done. There's no seat in the tabernacle to sit down. Because if there were, it would have communicated that the work is completed. Yet after Jesus provided purification for sins, he sat down. The nail-scarred hands of the Son now hold the scepter of dominion over the universe. And so he became as superior to the angels as the name Son he inherited is superior to theirs. So these 7 credentials are enough to convince me that when it comes to the matter of the salvation of my eternal soul, there's absolutely no need for me to muddle through anything. In closing, I'd like to offer this historical note. We as Americans are a people uniquely blessed. You know that. And we share a history with a unique origin. Christopher Columbus was a devout man of faith. He even wrote a book called Book of Prophecies. And he relates in it this historical account as it pertains to his voyage to find a western trade route on behalf of Spain, which ended up landing him in the Bahamas. And the quotation from this book of his prophecies reads as follows, quote, "It was the Lord who put into my mind, I could feel his hand upon me, the fact that it would be possible to sail from here to the Indies. All who heard of my project rejected it with laughter, ridiculing me. There is no question that the inspiration was from the Holy Spirit because he comforted me with rays of marvelous inspiration from the Holy Scriptures. I am the most unworthy sinner, but I have cried out to the Lord for grace and mercy, and they have covered me completely. I have found the sweetest consolation since I made my whole purpose to enjoy his marvelous presence." And the question I want to ask you this morning is God came with the fullness of his Son. Have you received the revelation? Are you enjoying his presence? Do you know that he will lead you? He will keep you. He will secure you. Are you able to say with the hymn writer, have you been to Jesus for the cleansing power? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Are you fully trusting in his grace this hour? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? No need to look any longer if you're not. Instead, place your faith in Christ, in the revelation of him who has the more excellent name, the Son of the living God. Amen.